Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. If you're new and you're interested in true crime and you're interested in astrology and learning astrology, please hit like and subscribe. Today I am going to be analyzing the natal chart of Rex Heuermann. A couple of you asked me to look at his chart, so that's what we're doing today. This is a fascinating chart. There's 3 yods to go over, and if you don't know what a yod is, I will be breaking all of that down, what that means, and the planets involved, and what kind of challenges that has created for this person. So if you don't know who Rex Heuermann is, this is a guy known as the Gilgo Beach serial killer. He is connected to a series of murders that were committed on Long Island, I guess on Gilgo Beach. And I believe they're now charging him with a couple of murders in Las Vegas and New Jersey. So the thing that all these victims had in common was that they were all female sex workers, and I believe they were all petite, all under 5'5" or something like that. So from what news sources are saying, what I'm hearing, there were multiple victims found with his DNA on them, and there are internet searches he has related to the victims and to the investigation. So I know the trial is going to happen later this year. Apparently, he is pleading not guilty, so he has not been convicted of anything yet, but the evidence looks pretty compelling. So this is a possible birth time for Rex Heuermann, 4:43 p.m. This is based on some playing around with progressions I have done, but I want to stress that this birth time is merely a possibility, and this chart time has not been verified. I also feel more comfortable holding off on discussing houses and treating this as though it is like a verified birth time because he hasn't been convicted yet. So I'm really just going to go into the aspects here, which do tell us a lot. It gives us a lot of information about his psychological makeup and what he was inwardly struggling with. We don't need to have a verified birth time in order to go over a lot of the relationships that the planets are making to each other in this birth chart. One of the main questions here is, does he have a moon in Cancer or a moon in Leo? So right now at 4:43, it's obviously at 2 degrees of Leo. If he were born in the morning, it would be, a moon in a late degree of Cancer. So initially, I was leaning towards a Cancer moon, but it doesn't fit as well with some of the progressions I've been looking at. And there are personality traits of his that do seem to fit a Leo moon better the more that I researched him. So I think we can get tripped up when we think of a Leo moon, or at least I tend to, because I naturally think of someone who's very gregarious and charming. This guy seemed to be on the quieter side. He wasn't very attractive. So, if this is close to his real birth time, he would also have Saturn in his first house potentially. And that could affect the outward personality of a Leo moon because it would be in his first house, his identity. So the first thing I want to just mention overall when looking at this birth chart is that he has all this Virgo energy. And then he has 2 planets in Scorpio, one of them being Mars, which is in its rulership. So here we can already tell that we have someone who could be incredibly precise, controlled, and he could spend a lot of time focusing on details and doing intense research. This is someone who can be calculating, strategic, and who could really be quite someone who really planned and plotted. So if you watched my chart on Sean Combs, he also had a lot of Virgo and Scorpio energy in his chart. These are very different charts. I'm not suggesting that Sean Combs and Rex Heuermann are the same person. I'm just, explaining the similarity. Um, The other interesting thing about this chart is that he has interlocking yods, which involve the sun and Jupiter in Aries. So I'm going to talk more about that through the video, but in general, when someone has multiple yods in their natal chart, this may point to someone who can have very sharp or critical turning points in their life, intense periods of having to psychologically adjust to something, and situations that propel them to change direction. So I think, just in looking at the chart to begin with, it feels a bit like this is someone who is going to have to constantly try to course correct throughout his lifetime. I did also just want to mention that the lunar eclipse that happened earlier this week would have hit his Pluto directly because I believe the moon was at 12 degrees of Virgo. Um, so that is a big deal. That could mean that more secrets are coming to light or a lot of information he was trying to keep hidden. Um, you know, where he was trying to keep hidden starts coming to the public. Interestingly, the eclipse may have also served as a breaking point for him where he does start to recognize old patterns of destructive behavior. Now, it doesn't mean that he'll necessarily change the behavior, but it could be that something comes to light, not only for others, but for him, for the person as well. And if you guys are watching, if you noticed you had a particularly rough week, it's possible that you had an eclipse hit, which means that the lunar moon was making some kind of an aspect to a planet in your chart. Me personally, I had an eclipse hit to my moon, so this was a very emotional week for me. It was rough. I had a couple of days where I struggled pretty emotionally. And we're also in Mercury in retrograde. So this is not necessarily an easy time. So if you are struggling, if you want some clarity on what could be happening for your natal chart right now, reach out to me. The link to contact me is in my descriptions. I'd be happy to hear from you and set something up with you. So the first, I guess, real aspect I want to talk about is that he has Pluto at 12 degrees of Virgo, making a direct opposition to Chiron in Pisces. And this is an aspect that could represent early encounters with death, trauma, or crisis. Um, Oh, yeah. Another thing I was going to say was that apparently his father died when he was 12 years old. So sometimes a major life event happens at an age that matches the degree of a planet. So in this one, it fits perfectly because Pluto represents death, something coming to an end. Now, I'm not sure that Rex had the best relationship with his father. If I were going into a reading with him, I would assume perhaps not, because Pluto is making an inconjunct to Saturn here. So this tells me, because Saturn could represent his father, a father figure, this tells me that when he was a child, growing up with his father, they may not have really seen eye to eye. Nonetheless, the way in which his father died, the sudden effect that may have had on the family, it all could have been very life transforming for Rex. So, like I said, the Pluto making this direct opposition to Chiron, this could represent someone that has early encounters with Pluto-like themes. And so, someone with this aspect, especially because it's opposing the Chiron, could develop Plutonian defenses to avoid feeling any old wounds. So this could look like compulsive behavior, secrecy, and developing power dynamics in relationships. Now, interestingly, he does have Pluto in the seventh house here. Again, I'm not going to swear by that because this is a progressed birth time, but that is interesting. Um, so With Pluto opposing Chiron, I like to provide real life kind of scenarios to get you guys to really imagine how the energy of this opposition could play out. So, a simple way to explain the energy in this type of an opposition is that imagine that there's a person who almost drowned in the ocean as a child. So either panic sets in when they are at the ocean or at the beach, right? Which is representative of being in touch with Chiron, that early wound, or they do whatever they can to control the entire ocean. So this could be someone who builds all sorts of dams and channels. They could build storm surge gates. They can try and build sandbars, artificial islands, really fill in areas to try and make the water disappear as much as possible. But the sea is so powerful that it always wins out. No one can really completely control it. In other words, someone can work and really try to chip away at completely trying to control and overpower this old wound. And yet it never goes away completely. You have to learn to work with it and heal the wound within you. I had also read that he was bullied a lot by other kids for years growing up. So that may be another possible manifestation of this aspect, some of those wounds he was holding on to, again, especially if Saturn is in the first house, because it involves wounds around his identity, his physical body, his appearance. So, um, apparently, his mother was also quite controlling, but he remained very loyal to her. And this may also be a manifestation of Pluto opposing Chiron, since loss around his father may have been quite destabilizing, Chiron and Pisces. And so some kind of safety for him came in the form of remaining close and loyal to the more powerful parent, who in this case was his mother. Now, Pluto is, of course, conjunct Uranus, which is the planet of sudden change. So, this may also symbolize that a sudden early loss may have created a deep wound. And it is possible that this resulted in the person trying to manage that pain through control, intensity, or escape. In general, Pluto conjunct Uranus, especially when it is opposing Chiron, may symbolize sudden relationship shifts, unconventional sexual behavior, secret lives, and intense but unstable connections. And by the way, Pluto conjunct Uranus, it is a very common aspect that lots and lots of people have. If you were born in the 60s, you would have this aspect in your natal chart. So the great part about this aspect is that it brought people together at the time in the 60s or later to disrupt power structures in place. It definitely would have been later than the 60s because people with this aspect were born in the 60s. So more like the 70s, it brought, a lot of revolution, a lot of reformation. So there's a lot of good that this energy could be used for. Now, interestingly, if we look at his sun, it is conjunct Venus, which means his identity is fused with a need for love and approval. Being liked and valued is usually central to who this person feels that they are. I think that he probably used the Virgo energy very well in his career here. But his sun is forming a Yod to both Jupiter and Saturn, which definitely complicates things. So this is our first Yod that we're going to get into, and it involves the sun in Virgo, Saturn in Aquarius, and Jupiter in Aries. So a Yod is an astrological configuration when you have a sextile between two planets. in this case, Jupiter and Saturn. And if these two planets were not part of the Yod, this would be a pretty nice aspect. This means that these two planets would work pretty well together. But the tricky part is that they each form an inconjunct to the Sun, which I'm going to say also may pull in this Venus, since it is conjunct the Sun. So I feel like there could be something here for him about needing to find a balance between a desire to take risks related to pleasure or gratification, which signifies Jupiter, and then also a need to be cautious, which represents Saturn. So this is like a guy who is driving with one foot on the gas pedal and one foot on the brakes. I'm struck by the fact that the Sun and Virgo are in Venus here, which probably means that this is someone who could be self-critical, or really concerned with getting things right, very focused on improvement or correction. So he may have been trying to fix himself or something in himself, since his ego, his identity, the Sun, is at the apex of this Yod. So it may be a feeling of something about me isn't quite right, so I have to keep adjusting. And on one shoulder, Jupiter is telling him, go big or go home, indulge your cravings, especially being that it's in Aries. It probably shows up at this as this kind of quick burst of energy and inspiration, while Saturn is on his other shoulder and telling him, be disciplined, control yourself. Now, with an inconjunct, someone is forever having to readjust. It's not like an opposition or a square where they just land on one side or the other and make a choice. With a Yod, this person would constantly be shifting back and forth between Jupiter and Saturn. So it could manifest in seeking pleasure and indulgence, potentially acting out in risky ways. But then afterward, he may try to regain control. So he may even analyze what he thinks he got wrong, or he may try to behave properly for a little while. Or this could play out in the reverse. So he may spend a lot of time trying to be controlled and disciplined until suddenly he feels the need to overcompensate with excess or risk taking. Then the Saturn comes back in to try to rein him in again, but because it's an inconjunct, it can only go so far because the pressure rebuilds and the cycle repeats. So I do want to stress a Yod is not necessarily a bad aspect to have. It's just incredibly challenging because with inconjuncts, we often go in expecting certain results that we are never going to get because the energy of the planets are completely different. They have nothing in common. So the Sun in Virgo here has absolutely nothing in common with Saturn in Aquarius, nor does it have anything in common with Jupiter in Aries here. So what he goes in expecting is never going to come out that way. So that's what necessitates the constant recalibrating. But if someone has a Yod and they can really learn to embrace flexibility, so rather they see life as an unfolding story or a mysterious journey that they're on, they accept the fact that they don't have all the answers, that they're going to have to keep turning unexpected corners. This can lead to really great artistry. So like the musician Prince had a couple of Yods in his chart, for example, as does Rex Heuermann. He actually has 3, as we will come to see. Now, a lot of astrologers would argue that he has a Yod with Pluto here as well, with Pluto making inconjuncts to Saturn and Jupiter as well. The general rule of thumb is that any planets between 0 and 3 degrees in orb would definitely be considered an inconjunct. Anything thereafter is questionable, but I am going to look at this as an inconjunct and I'm going to discuss it because I think it's something we have to consider. So with Pluto making an inconjunct to Saturn and Jupiter, the same deal applies, but in this case, what's happening is that this person may be constantly trying to adjust or manage compulsive desires that he has that he probably keeps locked up and secretive. So again, imagine that this is a person driving a car. He may constantly find himself going back and forth between pressing his foot onto the accelerator in terms of giving into his desires and then braking suddenly if he feels he has gone too far or too fast. And then sometime later, as his car is stopped, nothing is happening, his foot is going to go back to that accelerator because it just can't stop itself. It wants to give into that compulsion. And this would be a constant cycle for him. By the way, learning how to master the sextile in a yod is one way to deal with this aspect in a positive manner. So being that he has Jupiter in Aries, this is someone I see as really wanting to act quickly, take risks, follow impulses, but he has Saturn in its home side of Aquarius. And that would focus on principles, social systems, rational thinking, rules, and ideas. So he would need to learn how to combine the impulsive, courageous energy of Aries with the discipline of Aquarius. So this could look like someone who uses the energy in sort of a bold, fierce way, but with a long-term vision in mind. So for example, let's imagine that this is a person who wants to quit their job and start something new. They could combine the energy of Aries by making the decision to put in their 2 weeks notice with nothing concrete lined up, while the Aquarius energy could help them to start to put things in order. So create a business plan, start saving money, and building the new business step by step. Now, I will just say this. Unfortunately, if he did commit this crime, he may have used this sextile to his advantage by giving into his impulses and perhaps creating kind of like a long-term plan to try and manage it. So, for example, to try and get rid of the bodies or hide them in places where it would be very difficult for them to be found. So, I will just put that out there as a possibility as a way he could have used these two planets as a sextile. Um, Now, what's making things even more complicated for this yod, or these two yods, I should say, is that Saturn is making a square to Neptune. And this is not only going to make Saturn's job more difficult, it could also mirror some of the dynamics of the Yods in that he may swing between trying to be very good, very disciplined, but when he feels overwhelmed, he may feel as though he needs that Neptunian escape hatch. So when you have two planets in a square, there is friction. It's when the energy of two planets bump up against each other. So, for example, he has Saturn on one side telling him, don't lose yourself here. There will be consequences. You have to control yourself. Whereas Neptune tells him, it's fine, just this once. You deserve to escape. You've been too hard on yourself. Don't think about it. Life is short. So you can hear just how different the energy of each planet is in this case. Neptune in Scorpio in particular, would be, I would think, very enticing for him since it could feel quite addictive, this kind of a Neptune. So this is a person who could really feel pulled between deep emotional or sexual intensity and then hard, cold, rational restraint. I do think Neptune and Scorpio is important to pay attention to here because it may drive someone to deal with pain by escaping into very intense experiences. So possibly, taboo, dark sexual experiences. It could also involve a lot of fantasy and a lot of secrecy. So the moon, again, here it's at 2 degrees of Leo. It is making a square to Mars. Um, Obviously, if he was born way later in the day, um, I think it would move off of the square. And if he was born really, really early in the morning, it would also not be a square. But right now, it's definitely a square. And he likely has a square, I'm going to say. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he probably does have the square. It's more than likely because I think, just logistically, there's probably more hours in the day where he would have been born, where this would be making a square than not. So Moon square Mars is a concerning aspect given his charges. And speaking of the difficulty with Saturn in his chart, Moon square Mars can be a particularly immature aspect if, again, the energy is not used constructively. So, this aspect can cause emotional outbursts, sudden bouts of anger. People with Moon square Mars can become highly defensive, and it can make for very difficult relationships. So, this aspect also could symbolize anger or aggression with women. Because the moon is about the mother, there could be some kind of internalized anger he has towards his mother that he is projecting onto other women around him. Also, Mars is in Scorpio. So, of course, this may manifest as an obsession with sex, possibly sex workers, and potentially channeling this energy in the bedroom. One of the things that I think people find intriguing about this case is that this guy seemed to be living a double life. So he was married, his wife described him as a family man, he was a father, it seems like he was a loving father by all accounts, he had a good career. So it seemed like he may have been living this double life. And I was thinking about this Mars moon aspect and how it's possible he was able to somehow compartmentalize it and keep it somewhat hidden from his wife and kids. It still would have played out in other areas. Um, I'm thinking Mars and Scorpio in particular. That could be a Mars that really kind of goes behind the scenes, does what they want to do in private. So, um, so that this is an aspect that he could have done well at keeping under wraps in the home or at work, but behind the scenes, it could have played out. And of course, who knows? I mean, there may be more to the story than his wife is telling us. He could have been a tyrant at home. So that is a possibility, but I'm just saying that I do think it's possible someone could keep this aspect kind of compartmentalized. Um, so the other thing here is that he does have Jupiter squaring his nodes. So south node at 18 degrees of Capricorn, north node at 18 degrees of Cancer. Um, and by the way, north node in Cancer, becoming a really good father, is definitely a great way to use this north node to his advantage. But here we have Jupiter throwing him off his path. And there was some issue that Jupiter caused him in a previous life that is going to continue to cause him problems in this lifetime. He'll need to learn how to harness the energy of Jupiter in a more conducive way towards really being able to stick with being the family man, for example, that his soul ultimately wants for him here. And this brings me to my third yod of this chart, which involves Jupiter at the apex, and both Neptune and the Sun are making inconjuncts to this apex. So in this case, Jupiter in Aries, that planet on his shoulder that says, go big or go home, it's interacting with one of these planets, Neptune, which tells him to go for pursuing a secret pleasure that feels both compelling and risky. Neptune can also make things very foggy and unclear. So in my mind, I'm imagining, this could look like a racehorse that wants to forge ahead, despite the fact that the path ahead is quite blurry and he can't see straight. And then on the other hand, the sun in Virgo is trying to steer these planets or Jupiter in particular, very carefully. And it's saying, hold on a minute, let's analyze this. Let's think things through here. Let's think carefully. So that is putting a lot of pressure on the sun in Virgo, and the sun is involved in both of these yods. That's why I think I said at the beginning he has interlocking yods because both yods, well, all three of them involve Jupiter, and then two of them involve the sun. So the sun is really central. It's a central character in this chart in terms of trying to help him maintain a sense that he has things under control or that he's trying to restore a sense of order. And Jupiter in Aries is also a main character in these multiple yods. So I see this person as constantly um, trying to regulate the impulsive drive of Jupiter in Aries in this chart. So that is my analysis of Rex Heuermann. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video and learned a lot from it. Again, once he's convicted, I think that I'll feel more comfortable really doing a complete chart progression, going into the houses, because there's a lot more information once we connect the houses to the planets. So I think that that's definitely a video I can do in the future. Let me know if you guys want me to do anyone else. I know that someone mentioned another serial killer, so I'm going to look at that as well. Um, but as always, let me know what you guys want to see because I want to give you content that you want and to really explain things in a way that makes the most sense to you guys. So let me know what you think of this video. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if, those of you that have followed the case and that have, I guess, done some research on Rex Heuermann, or I know there's a couple of documentaries out about him. Let me know whether you think Leo moon or Cancer moon. Like I said, I was leaning towards Cancer moon in the beginning, but the more playing I did with the charts, I do think now I'm leaning more towards Leo moon. So let me know what you guys think. Does he strike you as more of a Leo moon person or Cancer moon? Let me know. As always, stay tuned for my next video. Thank you so much, as always, for your support. It makes my day to get your comments, and that helped with my rough week that I've had. So hopefully as the lunar eclipse dissipates, we will feel better. But again, if you're going through it, you're not alone. Let me know. Let me know if you want a reading, and I'm happy to do that with you. So yeah, stay tuned for my next video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.